Parents read these to their children. They think they're sweet. Glass slippers, red capes, spinning wheels, candy houses, singing mermaids with perfect hair. They weren't sweet. Fairy tales did not begin as soft little stories for sleepy kids in dinosaur pajamas. They began as warnings. Ugly ones, bloody ones. Stories whispered in kitchens, farms, forests, and famine towns where nobody had the luxury of pretending the world was safe. Then time got its hands on them. Then publishers cleaned them up. Then Disney came in with music, sparkle, sidekicks, and a tiny castle logo that basically says, "Relax. The trauma has been removed." But under all that glitter, the old stories are still there. And they are nasty. Start with Cinderella. Everyone knows the nice version. A sweet girl gets bullied by her stepmother. Her stepsisters are rude. She cries by a tree, or in the Disney version, in a garden, and then a fairy godmother appears like a magical crisis manager. There's a pumpkin. Mice become horses. A dress sparkles into existence. She goes to the ball. She dances with the prince. Midnight hits. She loses a glass slipper. The prince searches the kingdom. The shoe fits. She gets married. The end. Cute. Clean. Marketable. The older Grimm version is not that. In the Grimm version, there is no fairy godmother floating around with a wand and a cheerful little song. Cinderella gets help from birds. Doves, mostly. The magic comes from a tree growing on her mother's grave. That's already darker. Her mother is dead. Her only comfort is a graveyard tree and a flock of birds that apparently understand revenge. Then comes the slipper scene. The prince arrives with the shoe, and the stepsisters want that royal marriage so badly they start butchering themselves. The first sister tries the slipper, but her toe is too big. So her mother tells her to cut it off, not metaphorically, not emotionally. Literally. She cuts off her toe and shoves her bleeding foot into the slipper. The prince starts riding away with her until the birds call him out. They sing that there is blood in the shoe. He looks down, sees the blood, and brings her back. Then the second sister tries. Her heel is too big, so her mother tells her to cut off part of her heel. She does it. She slices off her own heel, jams her foot into the slipper, and tries to smile through the bleeding. Again, the prince rides away. Again, the birds scream the truth. Blood in the shoe. Wrong bride! Finally, Cinderella puts on the slipper. It fits without mutilation. The prince takes her away. That would already be enough. But the Grimms weren't done. At Cinderella's wedding, the stepsisters show up. They try to act friendly. They want to stand near power. They want to profit from the girl they abused. The doves handle it. They swoop down and peck out the sisters' eyes. One eye on the way into the church, the other eye on the way out. The story ends with the stepsisters blind for the rest of their lives. Disney took that and said, "What if the mice made dresses?" That is the change. Disney turned punishment into slapstick. The stepsisters became ugly, jealous clowns. Annoying, not horrifying. Cinderella's suffering became soft enough to sing through. The dead mother got pushed aside. The graveyard magic became a fairy godmother with a round face and a nonsense word. Bibbidi-bobbidi-boo is a lot easier to sell than foot amputation. But the old version matters because it was not about finding a prince. Not really. It was about justice. A brutal kind of justice. The kind people fantasized about when they had no lawyers, no therapists, no safety net, and no way out of a cruel household. Cinderella did not get revenge by learning self-care. She got revenge because nature itself turned against her abusers. The birds saw everything. The blood told the truth. The wedding did not erase the crime. The old Cinderella says, "Cruelty leaves evidence, even inside a pretty shoe." Then there is Little Red Riding Hood. The version everybody knows has the little girl in the red cloak walking through the woods to visit her grandmother. She meets the wolf. The wolf tricks her. He reaches the house first, eats the grandmother, puts on her clothes, and climbs into bed. Then Little Red arrives. Big eyes, big ears, big teeth. The wolf eats her too. But in the version most people remember, a woodcutter arrives. He slices open the wolf's belly. Grandma and the girl come out alive. The wolf is punished. Everybody learns a lesson about strangers and wandering off the path. Nice and safe. A monster shows up. A stronger good guy kills it. Charles Perrault's version from 1697 is colder. There is no woodcutter. There is no rescue. There is no second chance. The wolf eats the grandmother. Then he tricks the girl into getting into bed with him. In some versions, he tells her to take off her clothes and throw them into the fire, piece by piece. Her bodice, her skirt, her stockings. Then she climbs into bed. The famous questions come. Grandmother, what big arms? What big legs? What big ears? What big eyes? What big teeth? Then the wolf says the teeth are for eating her, and he does. That's it. Story over. Perrault even added a moral at the end, just in case anybody missed the point. He said, young girls should be careful around wolves, especially the charming kind. The quiet kind, the kind that follow them home, speak sweetly and slip into bedrooms. The wolf was never just an animal. He was a predator. A human predator wearing fur. That red hood was not just a cute outfit. It carried warnings about sexuality, puberty, danger, and men who knew how to sound harmless until the door was shut. Later versions softened it. The brothers Grimm added the hunter. Modern children's books added cheerier endings. The wolf became a Halloween costume, a cartoon villain, something with a goofy grin and bad table manners. Disney-style storytelling turned the danger into a chase scene, something frightening but fixable. That's the big change. The old story says the girl gets eaten because the world is dangerous and predators lie. The new story says help arrives with an axe. That change matters. Because the original Little Red Riding Hood was not designed to comfort children. It was designed to scare them into listening. It came from a world where forests were real threats, travel was dangerous, and girls were taught that one wrong conversation could destroy them. It is an ugly message. A victim-blaming message in places, a warning wrapped around fear, but it reveals what adults were truly afraid of. Not wolves. Men. The wolf's teeth were just the part they could put in a children's story. Sleeping Beauty might be the worst one. The Disney version is almost too elegant. A princess named Aurora is cursed by an evil fairy. On her 16th birthday, she pricks her finger on a spinning wheel and falls into enchanted sleep. The kingdom sleeps with her. She lies beautifully in a tower, untouched, glowing, waiting. Then Prince Philip fights through thorns, defeats the dragon, reaches the princess, kisses her, and wakes her up. True love's kiss. The most marketable form of consent-free romance ever invented. But Disney was not working from the oldest version. The older tale, published by Giambattista Basile in the 1600 SS, is called Sunday, Moon, and Talia. And it is horrifying. In that story, the girl is named Talia. Astrologers predict danger from flax. Her father tries to protect her, but one day she gets a splinter of flax under her fingernail. She collapses into a death-like sleep. Her father cannot bear to bury her, so he leaves her in a palace, alone. Then a king finds her, not a prince, a married king. He sees the unconscious girl and cannot wake her. Then, as the story puts it in polite old language, he gathers the fruits of love. That means he rapes her. She is asleep. She cannot speak. She cannot resist. She cannot consent. Then the king leaves. Talia remains unconscious. Months later, she gives birth to twins while still asleep, a boy and a girl. Their names are Sun and Moon. Servants somehow help keep them alive, depending on the version. But Talia still does not wake. One of the babies tries to nurse at her finger. The child sucks out the flax splinter. That is what wakes her. Not love. Not a kiss. not a brave prince. Her baby sucking a splinter out of her finger after she has been raped and given birth in her sleep. And the story keeps going. The king comes back and finds her awake with the children. He is happy. Unfortunately, he already has a wife. The queen finds out. She tries to have the children cooked and served to the king for dinner. Then she tries to have Talia burned alive. Eventually, the king has the queen killed instead, and he marries Talia. That was considered the happy ending. Disney took that nightmare and gave it a castle, a waltz, a pink dress, a blue dress, and 3 tiny fairy ants arguing over cake. The rape vanished. The childbirth vanished. The cannibal revenge plot vanished. The married king became a heroic prince. The unconscious girl became a symbol of romantic purity instead of a victim of sexual violence. That change matters because Sleeping Beauty exposes one of the darkest truths in old fairy tales. A lot of them were built around women having no control over their bodies. Fathers traded daughters. Kings took what they wanted. Marriage solved crimes that marriage should not have solved. If a powerful man hurt a woman and then decided to keep her, the story could call that justice. The sanitized version covers that with roses. But the older version is a warning about power. About beauty being treated like property. About how a sleeping woman could become the center of a story without being allowed to act in it. The curse was never the worst thing that happened to her. The king was. Then comes Hansel and Gretel. This one already feels darker than most, even in the children's version. 2 kids are abandoned in the forest. They find a house made of candy. An old woman invites them in. Surprise, she is a witch. She locks Hansel in a cage and fattens him up to eat him. Gretel tricks her into leaning into the oven, shoves her inside, and burns her alive. Then the children steal her treasure and go home. Family entertainment. But even that version hides something uglier. Hansel and Gretel comes out of a long history of famine stories. Europe knew hunger in a way modern fairy tale audiences barely understand. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 devastated huge parts of Europe, including German-speaking regions. Crops failed. Rain ruined harvests. Grain prices exploded. Animals died. People ate seed they were supposed to plant. They ate bark, roots, weeds, and whatever could be boiled long enough to pretend it was food. And in that kind of world, parents abandoning children was not just a fairy tale device. It happened. Families broke under hunger. Children were left behind because there was not enough bread. Old records from medieval famine periods describe abandonment, theft, disease, and rumors of cannibalism. Whether every horror story was true almost doesn't matter. People believed they could be true. That fear fed the tale. In Hansel and Gretel, the parents do not abandon the children because they are cartoon villains. They abandon them because the family is starving. There is no food. The stepmother says the adults and children will all die unless the children are taken into the woods. The father hesitates, but he does it. Not once. Twice. That is the part people glide past. The real monster at the beginning is not the witch. It is hunger. The gingerbread house is not just a fun fantasy. It is the dream of starving children. Walls made of bread. Roof tiles made of cake. Windows made of sugar. A house that can be eaten. A home that feeds instead of consumes. That is why the witch is so brilliant and so awful. She is the fantasy turned inside out. The children think they have found food, but they have found someone who wants to turn them into food. Disney never made Hansel and Gretel into one of its big Princess Machine classics, but the children's entertainment industry sanded it down the same way. Candy colors. Silly witches. Cute siblings. Gingerbread decorations at Christmas. The oven becomes scary, but not too scary. The famine disappears. The starving parents become flat villains, or sometimes they vanish from the moral center completely. The sanitized version says, "Don't trust strangers with candy." The older version says, "Civilization is 3 bad harvests away from parents leaving children in the woods." That matters, because Hansel and Gretel is not really about stranger danger. It is about scarcity. It is about what hunger does to love. It asks a question nobody wants in a bedtime story. What happens when a family cannot afford to stay human? The answer is a candy house with bones in the yard. And then there is The Little Mermaid. Disney's version is pure ocean glitter. Ariel is curious, rebellious, and adorable. She collects forks. She wants legs. She wants love. Ursula steals her voice, but the whole thing still moves like a beach party with trauma breaks. There is a crab conducting calypso, a flounder with anxiety, a father who learns to let go. The prince falls in love. Ursula gets stabbed by a ship. Ariel gets her voice back. She marries Eric. She waves goodbye from a rock in a sparkly dress. Perfect. Hans Christian Andersen's original from 1837 is not perfect. It hurts. In Andersen's story, the Little Mermaid is not just chasing a handsome prince. She wants an immortal soul. Mermaids live for hundreds of years, but when they die, they dissolve into sea foam. Humans have souls that live forever. She wants love, yes, but she also wants eternity. To become human, she goes to the sea witch. The witch cuts out her tongue. Not magically borrows her voice for a contract song. Cuts out her tongue. The mermaid becomes mute because part of her body is taken as payment. Then she gets legs. But every step feels like walking on sharp knives. That detail is important. Andersen repeats it. She is graceful when she walks. Everyone thinks she moves beautifully, but every step is agony. She dances for the prince, even though it feels like blades slicing her feet. The prince likes her. He cares for her. He lets her sleep outside his door on a velvet cushion like a pet, but he does not love her, not the way she needs. He marries another woman. And here is the final cruelty. The mermaid can still save herself. Her sisters rise from the sea, their hair cut off as payment to the witch, and give her a knife. If she kills the prince and lets his blood fall on her feet, she will become a mermaid again. She can live. She goes to his bed. He is sleeping beside his new bride. She cannot do it. So she throws the knife into the sea. Then she throws herself after it. At dawn, she dissolves into sea foam. No wedding, no voice restored. No father magically fixing everything with a golden trident. She becomes foam. Later, Andersen adds a strange spiritual ending where she becomes a daughter of the air and may earn a soul through good deeds over hundreds of years. It is not exactly happy. It is more like a consolation prize after emotional destruction. Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid during a period of deep personal heartbreak. Many scholars connect it to his unrequited love for Edvard Collin, a man he loved and could not have. Andersen wrote letters that were painfully intimate. Collin did not return the love in the same way and later married a woman. Soon after, Andersen wrote a story about a creature who gives up her body, her voice, her home, and her identity for someone who will never choose her. That is not a coincidence. Disney changed almost everything that made it ache. The pain of walking on knives became a fun montage of learning to use legs. The severed tongue became a glowing magical voice bubble. The prince's rejection became temporary confusion. The other bride became a disguised villain. The mermaid's death became a wedding. That change matters because Andersen's story is not about following dreams. It is about longing so deep it becomes self-erasure. It is about loving someone who cannot love back. It is about changing every part of the self to be acceptable and still not being chosen. It is about suffering beautifully while everybody applauds the beauty and ignores the suffering. Disney made Ariel's transformation empowering. Andersen made it a wound. That is the pattern with these stories. The old versions were not gentle because the worlds that made them were not gentle. Cinderella lived in a world where family could be the first place cruelty learned to speak. So the story gave her birds that could spot blood in a shoe and blind the women who lied. Little Red Riding Hood lived in a world where girls were warned about men through the language of wolves because saying the real thing out loud was too dangerous, too impolite, or too familiar. Sleeping Beauty lived in a world where a woman's body could be treated as land to conquer, and the story still might hand the man a happy ending. Hansel and Gretel lived in a world where hunger could walk into a house, sit at the table, and convince parents to leave their children under the trees. The little mermaid lived in the private hell of wanting someone impossible, then cutting away pieces of herself for a love that never came. Then the centuries passed. The blood was wiped up. The wolves got funny voices. The rape became a kiss. The famine became gingerbread. The knife feet became dancing. The dead mothers, severed heels, pecked out eyes, abandoned children, burned witches, cannibal queens, and girls dissolving into foam were pushed behind a curtain of songs and plush toys. That does not mean the sanitized versions are worthless. Sometimes children need softness. Sometimes people need the version where the girl gets the prince, the monster dies, and nobody asks too many questions about the oven. But the originals still matter. They are cultural crime scenes. They show what people feared before they had the language to analyze it. Predators. Hunger. Forced marriage. Sexual violence. Class cruelty. The terror of being powerless. The terror of being poor. The terror of being a girl in a world that calls danger romance if the man has a crown. Fairy tales were never just fantasies. They were survival manuals with teeth. A mother could say, "Do not talk to strange men," and a child might ignore her. But say, "The wolf will eat the girl whole," and the child remembers. A starving village could say, "Famine makes monsters of everyone," but that is too direct. So it becomes two children nibbling the window of a candy house while a witch heats the oven. A society could admit powerful men hurt sleeping women and get away with it. Or it could tell Sleeping Beauty and pretend the kiss was love. That is the real dark truth. The monsters were not invented to scare children. They were invented because the real world had already scared the adults. The fairy tale just gave the fear a face. A wolf, a witch, a stepmother, a sea witch, a king. And sometimes the most disturbing part is not what got removed. It is why it had to be removed. Because the old stories tell the truth too plainly. They say hunger can beat love. Desire can become violence. Beauty can attract danger. A family can betray its own children. A happy ending can be built on someone else's suffering. Love does not always win. Sometimes it marries another woman and watches the mermaid disappear into foam. So the stories were cleaned, packaged, illustrated, given songs, turned into bedtime. But under the blanket, the old versions are still breathing. Cinderella's stepsisters are still bleeding into the slipper. Little Red is still alone in the wolf's bed. Talia is still asleep when the king enters the room. Hansel and Gretel are still listening to their parents plan the abandonment. The little mermaid is still walking on knives, smiling because pain is the price of being loved by someone who will never love her back. That is what fairy tales used to be. Not comfort. Not escapism. Not princess branding. They were warnings with pretty names. Nightmares passed from mouth to mouth. Lessons dressed up so children would remember them and adults could pretend they were only stories. They weren't bedtime stories. They were warnings.